hosted a discussion recently on how unmanned aerial drones are being used in the U.S. for non-military purposes. This first portion of the event includes an analysis of public opinion on drones and remarks from Arizona Republican Paul Gosar, who notes that drones are already being used in his state to patrol the U.S. Mexico border and fight forest fires.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. My name is Andres Martinez. I'm the editorial director here at the New America Foundation and one of the coordinators of our exciting Future Tense partnership, which is a partnership between New America, Slate magazine, and Arizona State University, which looks at the policy implications of emerging technologies. Before getting us started, I just wanted to say that when we were planning this event a few months ago, I thought to myself, oh, how appropriate that we are doing this on VE Day. Turns out I was wrong, I think, by a day. It's tomorrow is the official commemoration of the end of World War II, at least in Europe. And the reason I thought that was appropriate was, obviously no other conflict has so altered the nature of warfare, in particular the way in which warfare took to the skies and became lethal to civilian populations in a way that it never had been before. But also World War II, of course, epitomizes the ways in which warfare and the all-out mobilization of society at a time of war alters technologies that then come back home. And that's one of the themes that we're going to explore today is, there's a broad fascination nowadays with drones, a technology that's evolved tremendously in large measure to its mobilization in the conflicts overseas. And now we're thinking and looking at the application of this technology for a lot of domestic uses. And people, I think, are naturally very unsettled by that. But there's also a lot of opportunity that this technology affords, and that's another aspect that we're going to explore today, not just the pitfalls and the dangers and the concerns, but some of the opportunities. So again, this is sort of a recurring theme that we're familiar with. And I see a very crowded room, so clearly this is a timely subject, one of great interest, and I appreciate your patience as you make room for neighbors if you have an empty seat next to you. So thank you very much for that. Also, just a couple of housekeeping reminders. The first being that this event is being webcast on the New America site as well as on C-SPAN. So obviously everything is on the record, and everything will be on the record from now on because of all the drones in the skies anyways. So we're watching. And that's a significant, if you want to ask a question, wait for a microphone so people watching can be part of the conversation and listen to you and also identify yourself. And if you're following along on Twitter, please use the hashtag FTDrones. So now I'd like to segue into our opening presentation, which is going to explore this question of what does it really mean to us when we hear the term drones? What do we associate with that? There's sort of, I think, a primal reaction to these flying robots as a substitute for a lot of technologies. And I can think of no better person to sort of set the table and connect the dots between the politics, the culture, and the technology than Will Saletan, who is one of the more versatile thinkers and journalists that I've ever run across. He's a great partner of ours, of our Future Tense collaboration as the editor, the national correspondent at Slate, longtime writer and editor at Slate, where he covers science, technology, politics, among many other topics. So Will, please get us started.
Thanks, Andres. And thanks to our partners at New America and ASU, and to all of you who managed to get here, not just be here, but to be here in person this morning, which in the future won't necessarily be presumed. We have a lot of great people to talk to you today, so I'm going to try not to drone on. Yeah, Joel caught that one. I do that for two reasons. One is because I like cheap puns, and the other is just to raise the question in your mind, when is the last time you heard the word drone used in any context other than the one we're using it today? So I know there's a lot of debate over the word drone and whether we should use it, but I would suggest to you that essentially the current context already owns the word drone. It is locked in, and I wouldn't worry about its connotations with anything else because everybody's forgotten what else it means. What I'd like to do today is set you up with some ways to think about how we think about drones, given what we know so far, which is not very much. But it's important to understand how the public thinks about this, because obviously, although there's we're going to talk a lot about the technology, the way people think about it will influence how it's received politically. So the first thing I want to do is just point out some of the dimensions that we're going to talk about today. Okay, what is a drone? Drones are enormously various. There's different kinds of drones. The term drone in this context is very old. Okay, so in terms of whether we should be using the word drone, we've been using it. It's been associated with radio-controlled aircraft going back for about two-thirds of a century at this point. Okay, so it's not a new term. It's an old term that's just been moved over with the technology, and of course, and at that time even they were talking about arming the drones. Okay, so we understood it in the context of war, and we understood it in the context of just carrying a payload. There's going to be a lot of talk today about whether drones are robots or not, and a lot of anxiety about the public thinking of these are robots when actually there are pilots behind them. Okay, I would raise the question to you that doesn't resolve the question politically, because even if you're not afraid of a robot running the drone, that the drone is a robot, you can be afraid of the person who is operating the drone. Another difference between drones, are they big or small? We have drones that go up to 30,000 pounds. We have drones as small as a pound. Okay, and people think of drones as these big things now because of the context we associated, but they're going to be smaller and smaller. That too will not resolve the political question, because although the smaller drones are less powerful, they're not carrying a payload like the big drones are. They have the other advantage that unmanned aircraft have, which is invisibility. In fact, they have it more so. So in terms of fears of being spied on, the smaller ones are going to be a bigger threat in a lot of people's minds. And then finally, the question of drones being armed or unarmed, and whether the question is being killed or spied on. And that, I'm going to suggest to you, is actually the one that right now is the bigger driver of the politics of this topic. Okay, so let's run this video. This is a video from the website Funny or Die, and it sort of captures in a comic way how we think about drones.
G.I. Joe's back and ready for a new age of warfare. It's G.I. Joe, Drone Operator.
Look, Cobra's hiding out in the little patch there.
Feel the adrenaline as G.I. Joe controls unmanned drone planes.
We probably got him. Oh no, Joe's getting tired. Refill his coffee.
Comes with an adjustable desk chair and special lower back pillow, so G.I. Joe can sit all day without back pains.
Look, Cobra supporters are mourning his death. Get him, Joe.
G.I. Joe, American hero, killing people with computers from the safety of America. Comes with a packed lunch, because there's not really any good places to eat around where G.I. Joe works. G.I. Joe Drone Operator and temperature-controlled Suburban Fortress sold separately. G.I. Joe!
Okay, so that captures the way that we think about drones now. It's sort of, it's an alternative to what used to be flying a military aircraft. And so there's lots of jokes about sloth and cowardice and in there, but it's all about us operating the drone. That's the point I want to make to you. It's all about, how we operate the drone. And that's and that is the context in which we've learned about drones. So if we go on to people who take this very seriously, to whom it's not funny at all, this is Code Pink protesting the John Brennan hearing. And here, these people are very serious about it. But again, the context is the victims are people overseas. They are foreigners. Okay, that's the presumption. This has gone into popular culture. This is from the TV show Homeland. One of the characters has gone over to the other side, is working against the United States. Why? Because in the story, an American drone has fired a missile into a school and killed a bunch of children, again, overseas. And it's not a fair representation of what drones do, but again, the understanding is we've hurt these other people with our drones, and so one of the characters turns against us. Then we begin to see in popular culture some notions of Americans being targeted. So here we have, this is from the TV show NCIS Los Angeles. The drone is in the United States. It's on a training mission. It's hacked into. So we now have hijacking minus the IJ. We have the drone taken over by a hacker and a missile fired. I think no one's heard in this episode, but the point is it can happen to you. Okay, and in this case, I think the hacker is an Islamic fundamentalist in the United States. But then we have, last year, the Bourne Legacy, a movie in which not only is the target an American agent, but the people firing the drone at him are our own dastardly government. And so we begin to see the idea of Uncle Sam as the threat in popular culture. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about public opinion just to put some meat on the bones of this. I'm not going to belabor all the numbers today. If you want the URLs, I can give them to you. But this is a Fox News poll from a couple of months ago, from late February. And basically what it shows is as the target of the military drone becomes more American, the support goes down. This is intuitive, but you can just see how it works. If the suspected terrorist is an American citizen, the numbers go down. If the attack is on American soil, the numbers go down further. You combine the two, you get the lowest numbers. That's the basic structure of public opinion. Some of you may remember this guy locked down the Senate for a filibuster over drones. I'm not going to play the video, but basically he said, we could have drones, American drones, firing at Americans sitting in a restaurant in San Francisco or Houston or wherever. And now, this is absurd because, as we all know, if the United States government wanted to kill you in a restaurant, they wouldn't use a drone. It would make no sense. They would use government-mandated health insurance. The humorist Andy Borowitz had fun with this, with Senator Paul's filibuster. Majority of Americans opposed to being killed by a drone. University of Minnesota poll showed 97% of those surveyed strongly agreed with the statement, "I personally do not want to be killed by a drone." You may see down below that the White House Press Secretary Jay Carney said that, tried to make the best of the poll and said, look, people are afraid of getting killed by a drone. We get that, but there is still broad public support for drones killing somebody else. Here we have the popular T-shirt, "Don't drone me, bro." This is also a bumper sticker. And you probably can't see, but the people being targeted by the drone are a man and woman and their child. Again, not a fair representation of drones, but you have to understand this is what's penetrated popular culture. And the operative thing here is drone as a verb. Drone has now been verbed. And if you're afraid of the word drone, you shouldn't be afraid of the noun drone. You should be afraid of this verb. That's the real problem. Here's another poll. This is a Gallup poll from March. So this is after Senator Paul's filibuster. Same structure of public opinion. Okay, same thing. As it becomes more American, the numbers go down, but now they go down much farther. Okay, the lowest number used to be 45, now it's 13. Okay, so presumably because of that filibuster and people thinking about the idea that drones might shoot Americans in this country, we have a big dip in public support for drones. Okay, who's operating the drone? That's another question, this whole us versus them psychology of the way the public thinks about this. This is a Fox News poll from, this is the same poll from February. Notice the difference in the questions. The first question is, do you approve or disapprove of the United States using unmanned aircraft to kill a suspected terrorist, a citizen terrorist on U.S. soil? Not much difference between white and non-white, not much difference between Republicans and Democrats. You ask the question, do you think the President of the United States on his own should be able to do it? All of a sudden a big gap opens up between whites and non-whites, between Democrats and Republicans. And presumably that's because Democrats and non-whites think the President is one of us, more so than whites and Republicans. And so there's less anxiety about it. So it matters who's being targeted and it matters who's operating the drone. Here's a question about, now we get on to domestic uses of drones. Who's the target? Again, we're going to see differences in public opinion. Search and rescue, there's no target. We're going to help somebody. There's no adversary there. Overwhelming support. Track down runaway criminals, there's a target, but I'm probably not a criminal. 67% support that. Control illegal immigration, again, pretty high. They're probably not looking for me or anybody like me. Issue speeding tickets. No, absolutely not. Why? Because that could be me. That could be me. I think that's what's going on, what the poll is telling us. Same Monmouth University poll. Here we're going to see another breakdown within the population. And this is in terms of the margin of support, those who support minus those who oppose it. And what you see is that when we talk about speeding tickets, tracking down criminals, not much difference demographically. When we get down to controlling illegal immigration, whites by a 50-point margin are in favor of using drones for that. Hispanics and blacks, half or less. The margin is half or less. And I think that's, again, anxiety about who's going to be targeted and by whom. It's not just the armed drones that people are worried about, it's privacy threats. And one way you can see this is a poll taken by Reason Magazine and their organization. And what they show is that when you ask about unmanned military aircraft targeting and killing American citizens who are suspected of being terrorists, yes, 32% are worried about that. But if you ask about your local police department using drones, do you worry they might invade your privacy? It goes up to 40%. Now, it's a smaller threat, right? You're not going to be killed. But I'm probably not a suspected terrorist. But I can imagine my police department targeting me. So the threat is less, but it's more widespread. More people can identify with being the target of the drone, so the numbers go up. And lastly, today we're probably going to talk a lot about, if people knew more about drones, if they simply understood more, they would be more favorably disposed. That's not necessarily true. In the military context, it basically is true. The more people know about military drones from this poll from Gallup, you can see that the numbers go up in terms of their support for using airstrikes, whether that's domestically or overseas. As long as we're targeting suspected terrorists, the numbers go up in all categories if you've read or learned more about the use of drones militarily. But if you come to the domestic context, you don't get that. For help with search and rescue, for controlling illegal immigration, yes, the margin goes up in this third column. If you are more familiar with the use of drones militarily, it goes up. But when we get down to tracking down runaway criminals, the margin goes down by 14 points. I think that's because the respondents some of the respondents are thinking you're actually going to shoot the criminals. I'm not sure about that, but I think that explains why the immigration numbers didn't go down and the criminal numbers did go down. And when we get to speeding tickets, the numbers drop by 34 percentage point drop among people who know more about the use of, are more familiar with the use of drones militarily. So I think what this shows us is that what people learn from watching drones in the military context is that they're very effective. They're very good at what they do. And that does not at all resolve the politics of it, because whether you're going to support the drone mission for that use depends on not on whether you like the drone, but whether you like the mission. So with that, I'll wrap up and let everybody get on to what I think will be an exciting day of a lot of interesting facts and observations. Thank you.
And now we're going to shift into the very practical realm. Great thinkers like Will and people at an institution like New America have the luxury of analyzing issues over time and thinking about where we're going to be as a society in 3, 5, 10 years from now. But we're now going to get the perspective of somebody who has to wrestle with a lot of these issues in real time as a legislator, as a member of Congress, who has to draw lines and set rules and balance security imperatives with our individual liberties and such. And to moderate this conversation with Congressman Paul Gosar, I have the pleasure of introducing Rosa Brooks, who is a Schwartz Fellow here at the New America Foundation, in addition to a professor of law at Georgetown University, a columnist for foreign policy, and a good friend. Rosa, I'm going to hand it off to you as you get the mic on.
No, I'm not going to go up there, Andres, because I'm told that I'm now physically attached to this chair. But thank you, and good morning to you all. This is a terrific turnout, and thank you all for coming. We are really thrilled to have Representative Gosar with us this morning. I know that a lot of the action on drone issues is now moving to Capitol Hill, and he's going to be able, I hope, to tell us a little bit both about what these issues look like from his perspective as a congressman from Arizona's 4th District, but also to talk a little bit about how this whole discussion is beginning to play out on the Hill and what the prospects are for regulation in the future. So, Representative Gosar, you are on the House Oversight Committee on National Security. You're also on the Unmanned Systems Caucus. And I know, looking at your bio, you are actually a normal person. You're not. You weren't born as a member of Congress.
No.
Some of these guys, I think they were. So you were a normal person. In fact, you had a practice as a dentist in Flagstaff for 25 years. And so this issue is probably a good one for you because you are probably, people's reaction to drones is a sort of immediate, and people's reaction to dentistry is very similar. So are drones like dentistry? Is this something where we should, we've got a lot of irrational fears, but frankly, we should just get over it and realize that at least when properly thought about, drones are good for us, not something to be feared?
Well, my staffer once said that, Dr. Gosar, you've gone the wrong way. To a patient in the waiting room, they said, the dentist is waiting to see you. And now you went to the government, and I'm here to help you. It's going definitely the wrong way. But there's a two-sided aspect of drones. I mean, I look at it as looking at a bee, a colony of bees. There's killer bees, but there's also drone bees. And drone bees are worker bees, so there's opportunities. But what we have to do is flush out the detail. And as a dentist, the beauty is in the detail, and that's where we have to look at it.
So give us some examples of so when the drone bees and the drones are doing their good drone things, what do those look like?
Well, there's an application. I'm from Arizona, and we've become victims of our own environment. We have, in my first term, in my first year, we had the largest forest fire in Arizona's history called the Wallow Fire. U.S. taxpayers spent $400 million putting that fire out, and you lost $2.5 billion worth of assets. Imagine for a second that you were able to use one of these drones, worker drones, to do your environmental impact statements or your NEPAs and actually do a pattern of actually cutting the forest. And it makes it more efficient for the lumber company, makes it more efficient to make money, but also allows trust to be built because environmentalists don't trust the logging companies. So from a far distant way, you can actually build a pattern. The logger does it very, very quickly, but then also you get confirmation from the environmental community on how do you get that done. So here's an application that actually makes it work and puts it into real-life perspective. I mean, you could actually take it into an aspect of looking at our aging infrastructure, where you can actually look at the roads and determine how you're going to prioritize roads and repair, and actually look at materials that are experimental and how they're weathering, and working under stress.
So I think this is an important point, and Will's already made it as well, that we need to separate out the issue of the technology itself from the issue of the various ways we might choose to use those, and those are all a set of policy questions.
Yep.
And I can certainly imagine a lot of extremely beneficial uses of unmanned aerial platforms, including for disaster relief purposes in the wake of earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, that sort of thing. But even in the atrocity prevention field, looking at potential genocides and other atrocity crimes overseas. That if U.S. Satellite imagery, for instance, during the Balkan Wars was really critical in locating mass graves and being able to trace responsibility for some of the massacres. And I could imagine similar value of surveillance footage from drones, even more so in a more real-time kind of way. But I guess the challenge here, obviously, is that the technology itself is, it's just a technology. There's nothing deterministic about how we use it. And yet it enables people to do things that they hadn't been able to do before. And let me give you an example of one of the tough ones, I think. So presumably, I could build a drone or buy a drone, a unmanned remote-controlled vehicle, using lawful, publicly available technology. I can buy one on Amazon.com for a few $100s. I could also take a legally registered weapon, and if I'm smart enough, I'm not, trust me, but I'm sure some of you are, I could figure out how to connect these two things, and I can make my very own weaponized drone. So here's a question. You're someone who's been known as a staunch Second Amendment advocate. Should this change the way we think about Second Amendment issues? Is this no issue at all? This is just, hey, you've got a legally owned gun, you've got a legally owned remotely piloted vehicle, you put them together, you've got a legally owned weaponized remote piloted vehicle, no problem? Or is this the kind of thing where we need to start going, wait a second, this is actually qualitatively different. This isn't just 1 + 1 is 2, and 2 is fine. This is wow, something just happened here, and we need to worry about it in a different way, and maybe our constitutional assumptions apply in a different way.
Well, this is exactly, why we have to flush this out. I'm a very staunch Second Amendment person, but I'm also the person that's voted against CISPA and the NDAA. So I'm very keen about our constitutional implications.
Can you explain CISPA?
Yeah, this was our cybersecurity aspect. As a dentist, I'm under HIPAA rules for privacy, and the law didn't even come close to HIPAA requirements that I'm supposed to protect my patients. So I'm very keen about the privacy we as American citizens are entitled by our Constitution. NDAA, I don't want people to be detained without being charged. I have a wrath of making sure that government is an arm's length away. So this is the issues that we're finding ourselves, and I also stood with Rand Paul. I went over to support him in the Senate chambers when he was having his filibuster to have this conversation from the administration. So this is that balancing act, and it is one of those ones that we need to have conversation about. And we're going to be able to see some of that by the Congress actually passed a 2012 FAA Modernization Act to actually put the sites into play to see how we can actually articulate and see what you can do with this and have a transparent discussion about what its applications are and what are going to be the rules and regulations that govern that.
When we were chatting earlier in the hall, you said obviously the Constitution needs to be our touchstone for figuring these things out, but is the Constitution going to give us answers here? I mean, these obviously, these are technologies that are the framers of the Constitution could not even have dreamt of. Do we even have an adequate framework for thinking about either the privacy implications or the lethal implications of these technologies in the hands of private citizens?
I absolutely think so, because in dentistry we run under a system called KISS, Keep It Simple Stupid. And the Constitution is a brilliantly simple, articulated message. And so you can break it down into simple parts. And I think that's what the framers wanted. They could have never envisioned this. But the principles are the same. You break it into smaller parts and have that discussion upon that. It all starts with personal accountability and personal responsibility. And I think that once you break down the Constitution in that framework, it's very easy to have an application.
See, I get worried because the devil's in the details, right?
Oh, I'm a dentist. I'm going to tell you, if I leave a crown high, you're going to be coming back over and over again. Beauty is in the details. And that's why I feel that I'm perfectly structured and perfectly situated from a state that's very militarily based. We have a border issue. We've got plenty of commercial applications. So I'm perfectly situated to be sitting at the table to have those discussions. And I intend to have them publicly with the American people.
But can I press you on that a little bit, though, from for instance, the Second Amendment perspective? I mean, do you see, and maybe the answer is simply, we don't know, we haven't had that discussion in a serious way yet, but do you see that this as the notion that private citizens could possess, weaponized remote control flying vehicles as just a totally different issue where no, you actually, maybe you don't have, maybe your Second Amendment rights don't extend to that, versus do you see this as, yeah, they do. We just need to make sure that the right citizens, do we have a different background system check? How would you begin to think about working out the details on something like that?
Well, I think we've already started to see it. I think that you saw the conversation that Senator Paul had on the floor, was to actually have a discussion with the administration that clearly somebody an American citizen sitting at a cafe wouldn't be a target. I mean, that's the start of the conversation. You start very, very broad and you move it very, very small. And I think that's the nuances that we're actually having. And I think that some of the critical things that, the killing of a terrorist who is a U.S. citizen, what about his son that was in that area? We have that conversation. And you methodically, pictorially go through this, but you also have that conversation in the public. You don't keep it behind closed doors. That's why you have to air this out and make sure that the American public's comfortable with it. And I think once you air those things out with the American public is going to decide and put those parameters in. And I think too long, you call me a normal person. I tell everybody I'm a dentist impersonating a politician. So things got to rationally make sense to me, is that I think when you share that with the American public, are they difficult issues? Absolutely. But what you can do is have that conversation, and you'll sort them out by having a clear, defined, articulated conversation.
Do you think that this clearly defined conversation is beginning to happen on the Hill? What's your prognosis for the likelihood that we are going to get a sort of serious discussion on the Hill, which might lead to some actual legislative action?
you are. And I mean, just the whole fact that we're now competing for test sites. And in my district, it's a very libertarian-based type of a district. We have these conversations all the time. I mean, you know, I'm a hero for not voting for CISPA and for the NDAA. But that's the conversation that you want to have, is take that technology and say, listen, what part of that application can you use? Like, for example, the forest industry, pest control in farms, and border security. I mean, Arizona is front and center. I mean, look at all the questions we're asking. And so this is, you know, sometimes what I've also said is that, you know, have the discussion, be a leader in that discussion. Make sure that you turn up all the questions and start that discussion. And that's one of the things Arizona is very prominent about, is that we came into this country kicking and screaming. We wanted to recall judges. That's why we were delayed coming into the country. And we continue that onslaught of asking questions. And ASU, you know, is sponsoring this today, is another one of those key elements of education. We also have Embry-Riddle, that actually is one of the top aeronautical schools in the country, actually doing some of this. So it's on the forecast and it's on the forefront. And I think this discussion is coming home now that we see its deployment on border security, identification in crops, and the commercial side of it.
Is this something, I know that the border control authorities have already used unmanned aerial vehicles.
Just minimally.
Just minimally. Is this something where you're seeing from your constituency a lot of interest among private citizens in talking about how do we develop these technologies, how do we put them to use commercially, how do we, are you getting that from local law enforcement? Is there a sort of groundswell of interest at the grassroots level, or is this still mostly a executive branch federal matter?
No, it's all over. I mean, from our police and local districts, you know, search and rescue. I mean, think of an example. You talked about the mass atrocities. Well, what about just what happened over in Colorado in an avalanche? Sending one of these up with a thermal imaging. You could actually probably identify where those bodies are or people are, so that you get quick responses. Or if you have a hiker stranded up on a mountain, you can actually look at thermal currents and drop food or first aid. So there's lots of applications, and it's starting to happen right now. In Arizona, we're seeing it at our police level, talking to people. This is what we have, you know, for bomb squad, bomb scares, to search and rescue. And then people we're having that discussion, you know, saying, listen, you know, because of the issues of the NDAA and CISPA, people are bringing these into the discussion and asking, what do you see, Congressman Gosar, from your perspective? And I see from behind the scenes that most of my colleagues are having that discussion with their constituents. Is it early on? Absolutely. But we're going to flush some of these things out here shortly in regards to where the test sites are, what are the applications, what are we going to allow the FAA, the military, the police state, the commercial applications to do. And that's part of the legislative process.
I did some research for a recent foreign policy column on how easy it is to access these technologies just as a private citizen right now, and I must admit I was a little astounded at the level of sophistication I personally, with my Visa card, could achieve just by ordering things off the web. I should say I own 3 drones. 2 of them are little tiny helicopters, or my kids own 3 drones. 2 are little tiny helicopters, and 1 is a giant flying goldfish. None of them have been weaponized, but I don't think Will mentioned there was also a recent poll that Reason magazine commissioned, and obviously, as we know, the devil's also in the details on these polls. Depending how you ask the question, you get a very different answer. But it came up with the somewhat astounding revelation, if we believe it, which was that something like 47% of Americans felt that if their neighbors or any other person or government agency for that matter were flying a surveillance drone over their property without their consent, that 47% of Americans thought that they believed that they had a right to shoot that down. So I'm being very careful with the little fish. I mean, I've back to maybe irrational fears of dentistry. Are you concerned that in the time it takes our political process to sort of slowly chew over this stuff, that we're going to have some messy situations arising on the ground as private citizens engage in creative but possibly extremely idiotic uses of these technologies?
We've seen it already. When you start seeing the applications of planes after World War II, helicopters after World War I, and helicopters after World War II, you've seen the technology. Even in dentistry, you remember the old belt-driven, drill? They were like, oh my God, I got to see that again, to air-driven, and now to lasers. I mean, all those applications come, and there's going to be sticky wickets, as we call them, that we come across. But you bring those up not to be scared of them, but to bring them up and share the light of the light of air to the aspect and have an honest discussion with those. So I think that's going to come. That's the natural progression of human nature and a new technology is finding out what it can do, what its parameters are, and how do we place it into the best light when we limit it in its negative light. But I think there's always that application.
Congressman, I know you're on a pretty tight schedule, but we've got a few more minutes, so if you don't mind, let's see if we have any questions from folks in the audience here. And let me ask if you could, when you speak, stand up and identify yourself and your affiliation as well. Sir?
Thank you. Is it on? My name is Zohar Malik. I'm a National Defense University professor from Islamabad. Recently arrived as a fellow at SAIS, a senior fellow there. So this is very personal to me as well, which you've not really talked about. And maybe you could understand the way we feel in Pakistan. A lot of people have been talking to me about the fact that Pakistan is not a friend because it has its own strategic objectives to maintain its own interests. And one of those is to safeguard the lives of its own people. So what I fail to understand is that why the American public finds that it's easy to demonize Pakistan for not liking drones, for the fact they're killing the children of the country. There's many children have died, and it's a consistent effort where by one hand you provide money, especially the 2010 floods, for example. There was a lot of extensive help. But on the other hand, children were being killed.
So
and this is how we see it. So what is your take on that?
So we've got on we've been talking about some of the potentially positive applications of these technologies, but obviously to people in Pakistan, the face of drone technologies is they're killing people. They're killing people, including people who are innocent. Does that speak to, in your mind, Congressman, is that a failure of U.S. policy? Is that something where we've got the policy wrong, and we need to review how we think about the so-called targeted killing program, whether by drones or something else, or in your mind, is that more of we need to do a better job of explaining what we're doing and why?
Well, I think there's a lot of different aspects. I mean, personal accountability and personal responsibility are huge in my world. Just so that you know, I'm the first of 10 kids. There are 5 Democrats, 4 Republicans, 1 independent. So the first time my wife ever met my family, she called her mom and said, oh my God, these people hate each other. But with that is a responsibility of people to know and to make sure that they're not harboring criminals or international thugs. And I think that's the telltale of a communication or community. So I think from that standpoint, there's a balancing act from the people of Pakistan and harboring criminals. I think there's an aspect from the defense in regards to making sure that we're not targets. And I think there's a way of doing technology in a way that fashions, which drones can start to do now, is depicting who are the people and picking a civilian versus a militant. So I think that's a conversation here. I don't think that there's any right answer right now because I think there's plenty of rungs to go around. But I think what we have to look at is rewarding good behavior, not honoring bad behavior.
And let me just say that we are going to, most of today's program is focused on domestic issues, but we are going to talk about some of those foreign policy issues later on today. I think I'm talking about them, in fact, around 12:30. So we will come back to some of those issues later on.
I think you can hear me. I'm Colonel Dale Doucette, retired Air Force scientist. Let me say that I started running drones in the 1930s. They were called kites. And my model airplanes were drones. And about 90% of the drones in this world are really good, peaceful uses. We use them in medicine. We run them down into your body. We're going to have, all of us are going to have drone cars, which we're going to run within the next 10 years. So the reality is that drones are here, and that isn't going to go away. And most of the uses are peaceful uses, and they're going to increase the quality of our life. So I don't like to see an emphasis on all the negative issues. It doesn't matter what technology you have in this world. When it develops, it's going to have some negative aspects, and this is included. So I hope you don't just emphasize the negative issues, because they are a small part of the development of drones.
Hello, I'm Timothy Reuter, and I'm president of the DC area drone user group. We have about 320 members, and I like to say we have 320 entrepreneurs in waiting who are ready for when things open up legally in our country to be able to operate our equipment for both social good and commercial purposes. One of my concerns is that there's a lot of talk about large institutions, large companies using drones for commercial purposes, but most of us are operating equipment that costs under $500, is pretty simple to use, weighs under 5 pounds, and how are we going to make sure that the cost of being certified and legally allowed to use our equipment for commercial purposes doesn't exceed exponentially the cost of the equipment itself? We want to make sure that somebody who wants to do some simple wedding photography isn't strangled by regulations and various other requirements. So how do you see striking that balance so that the small operators are allowed to flourish and contribute to our national economy? Thank you very much.
Well, first of all, if I had that answer, we'd already have a dynamic economy going right now. That's what the mission right now, the problems in Washington, D.C. are, is how do we look at big business applications versus small business? How do we get an administration to look at the backbone of this country as a small business person? And I was a small business person. So there is this happy medium, and boy, I tell you what, it's not just in this application of unmanned drone aspects. It's across the board in all business aspects. We need to have tax reform that is more for investment, that's broad-based and making it a pro-investment type of a policy in the United States. But that's the problem that we have right now in Washington, D.C. So I wish I had the answers. We have to have the application. Typically, your big companies are more of the cutting edge, although you could argue that it's a small entrepreneur that's moving that across the board. So it is a dynamic interchange, and I would like to invite you to utilize your voice when you gather people together as a co-op to articulate that message and make sure that you have the ear of legislators and of Congress, just like the big companies do.
Congressman, I know we have some more questions, but I also know we need to make sure you're not late for your next engagement. So I think we better wrap up, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it, Roger.
More now from this New America Foundation event on drones. MIT professor and former fighter pilot Missy Cummings says aerial drones are revolutionizing the agriculture sector and will likely do the same for the cargo transport industry in the next 10 years. Professor Cummings also said the military's use of drones has saved lives. She's joined on the panel by Michael Toscano, CEO of the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems. This part is about 45 minutes.
Down a little bit more into the state of the technology. And for this segment, we have a very able moderator in Shane Harris. You can go ahead and come up. Shane is a national security writer at the Washingtonian magazine, one of the top reporters on all things national security in town. He's the author of The Watchers, The Rise of America's Surveillance State, which is a very good book. And I should thank Shane because in addition to helping to moderate today, he was part of our informal brainstorming sessions on putting together the entire day. And so I want to thank Shane for his thought leadership on this subject. And now I turn the program over to you.
Great. Thanks, Andres, very much. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. So that was a great introduction to a lot of the really nettlesome policy challenges that we're facing with this technology. Now what we're going to do is sort of, as Andres said, try to understand what the state of this technology is and where it's going in the relatively near future, because I think it is true to say that this is really poised to take off and potentially be very transformative and perhaps even disruptive, but also extremely exciting. So the two people we have here with us today to help us do that are extremely capable, and I'm really excited to have them both together. First to my right is Missy Cummings, who's an associate professor of aeronautics and astronautics at MIT. She spent 11 years as a naval officer and military pilot in the U.S. Navy, was one of the Navy's first female fighter pilots, and wrote a book about it called The Hornet's Nest. Missy and I have had the chance to sit on panels before, and she is just packed with amazing insights and information into this stuff. And she's great. She is sort of one of my favorite people to talk to on this. And then Michael Toscano, who represents just the tremendously diverse and growing side of the, I guess it's fair to say, the commercial application, the potential business uses of this, as the president and CEO of the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International, which includes government agencies and members as well, not just corporations. And previously, he served as program manager for research and development for nuclear security in the Defense Department. So he brings a level of governmental insight to this as well. So the first question I want to start with is ask both of you to kind of put on take out your crystal ball here. And Missy, I want to start with you. And if you were looking out at the next 5 to 10 years of the landscape domestically where drones might be used, what do you see as the probably going to happen applications of this technology? And what are some of the sort of maybe more pie in the sky that might happen given the right circumstances in the next 5 to 10 years? What does America look like in a world of these?
Well, what's happening right now, it's kind of a quiet revolution. Drones are revolutionizing the agriculture industry. This is an industry where we just can't get enough people to do the jobs that we need done, and farmers desperately need the technology both for health and crop surveillance, being able to see what's happening with the tractors in the field, who will also become robots. John Deere has an amazing set of robotic tractors. So this is a community that absolutely needs it for the bottom line. I think the next big revolution that you're going to see is going to be in the cargo industry. In a very quiet corner of Afghanistan, there are 2 little helicopters called the K-MAX helicopters that have, by themselves, just trucking back and forth between point A to point B, have carried over 3 million pounds of goods by themselves with just a human looking at them through a ground control station on the ground. So I think that you will see the civilian cargo community go that way as well. There certainly is a lot of interest from FedEx and UPS, who can reduce costs quite a bit and possibly improve safety if you take the human out of the loop.
So when would you say that's something in the next 5 to 10 years is realistic?
I think the agriculture is happening now. I think in 5 to 10 years you will see a much more mature industry. Japan basically does all of its crop testing with UAVs, an entire country. So in fact, the United States, we lag a little bit in terms of the implementation of that technology. The cargo, you will see in 5 to 10 years that more military missions will be turned over to cargo. With the capability is there to turn commercial missions over to cargo, but it's the regulatory agencies, the FAA, global regulation agencies that will basically slow that down a little bit. So we're probably looking at more like 10 to 15 years for that.
And then are we imagining then new kinds of aircraft, or are we imagining putting sort of unmanned systems into existing planes? So you're still going to see the same FedEx and UPS plane, or is it going to look more like?
Yeah, I think the funny thing is what most people do not realize is if you've flown on an Airbus, you're actually flying in a UAV variant. Any digital fly-by-wire aircraft is capable of being a UAV. Airbus aircraft and some Boeing aircraft are highly digital, highly automated, and the pilot is really there just babysitting the aircraft. So it's actually not a huge leap. We could actually convert most commercial planes to UAVs right now with little fanfare. But what's going to happen in the future as new planes are built, they will include new types of sensors, such as some LiDAR sensors and some millimeter wave sensors, to actually allow them to have more capability in bad weather, for example.
And we'll talk more as we go on too about what the technology is capable of doing, what its limits are. So Michael, if you're looking at this from your perspective, particularly how industry sees this, what's the next 5 to 10 years look like?
Well, when you talk about the next 5 to 10 years, the real question is when do we get into the national airspace? Because once that happens, we've just released an economic report that says within the first 3 years, the economic impact is 70,000 new jobs and about $14 billion of economic dollars that are going to be infused. And when you look at over 10 years, the numbers go up to over 100,000 new jobs and over $82 billion. But, you know, there was a couple of issues that were brought up earlier, if you don't mind. First of all, the weaponization of unmanned aircraft systems, and they are called UASs. If you look at the Department of Transportation, or if you look at, in this case, the FAA, they are the authoritative body, and they call them UASs.
Right. You all don't use the word drone.
We don't use the word drone because if you go to who the experts are in this particular case, which is the FAA, they call them UASs. We call them UASs because there is a system. There is a human being, and we heard about accountability. And that is truly important, that there is accountability for all of these systems. Someone is operating the system, and the system comprises of what flies, which is about 30%, the mission package payload, or what they're carrying, the communication system that exists, the ground station, and the human beings, because that's what makes up the system. So anytime you see any of these things flying, that's what you need to imagine as a system that's being operated. So with that being said, the FAA right now says that no aircraft, manned or unmanned, can deploy any weaponization at this point in time. Okay? There is no way that you can deploy, so you can't take the young lady who had, Rosa, who had the fish. She can't take and put a weapon on that and use it. They are breaking the law. And if you break the law, you should be held accountable. And so that's a big key issue that I think some people don't understand, is that there are provisions in place. And what
the police couldn't do this either?
That is correct.
Okay.
So when you get to the point where Missy brought up agriculture, people don't understand also, and that's what I say, there's a lot of information that is either being misrepresented or not being disseminated, that you realize that we have about 7 billion people in the world. By the year 2050, we're going to have about 9 billion people. There isn't enough food to feed everybody. So precision agriculture is going to be within the first deployment of these type systems is going to be in the agriculture world. And that's where there's going to be a tremendous ability for us to be able to produce more food. So when you think that you'll be able to feed millions, hundreds of millions of people, you could almost do away with starvation on the planet by utilization of this technology. That's the ramifications. That's the upside of this type of technology. It is huge. When you stop and think that if there was no privacy concern, and if there was no safety issues, and if that happens in the next 3 years or so, the ability for us to utilize this technology is unbelievable. When you look at the students that Dr. Cummins is involved with right now, and you look at the entrepreneurs that were just mentioned here, it will be unbelievable the effect that you'll have. You'll be able to understand how weather affects this planet. You'll be able to understand how nature interacts with us in a way that we've never been able to understand before. The research and the exploration that will be available to human beings to understand how to do things in a more effective, efficient, and safer way is unparalleled. It's almost like the Industrial Revolution, or when we made a determination we were going to go to the moon. So this has some real tremendous capabilities that we're at the precipice of unlocking the door.
And in that regard, too, I mean, it seems like the big date that everyone's waiting for, right, is September 2015, which is when, and I want you both to chime in on this, and briefly explain for the audience, the date by which the FAA has to be prepared to integrate the national airspace with this technology. So, Michael, why don't you describe what that means briefly, and then for both of you, once we hit that date and the skies are sort of effectively open, you know, how's that going to roll out, and when are we going to start? I mean, are we going to start seeing drones immediately over Washington, or what's that going to look like?
Again, if you look at the FAA reauthorization bill, it does say that the FAA is responsible for that integration by 2015, the September timeframe. The FAA's role is safety. Anything that goes into the national airspace has to be safe, and that's regardless if it's manned or unmanned. So that is their paramount and only responsibility. The FAA at this point in time is not responsible for privacy. And so that's a different issue that either the Supreme Court or the Homeland Security or other agencies are going to have to determine as far as that concern goes. But the FAA is right now identifying 6 test sites, and those sites will be utilized to assure that we have safety in anything that goes into the national airspace. So once we achieve that, then you'll be able to understand that it's okay to fly these things and take all of the advantages that I highlighted a little bit.
So they're going to be looking at this and saying, you know, setting ceiling caps or saying who can go where? I mean,
yes, but I think it's worth noting that this is only for small UAVs. Mm-hmm. This is not for integrating large UAVs on the scale that we're talking about for commercial aviation, particularly cargo. So, you know, everybody points to the September 2015 as some magical date, only it's actually a very small stepping stone in what's going to happen to have truly integrated UAV integration across international and national airspace at all weight classes.
And talk about, what has to then happen if that's step one? Is step 2 going to go what you're talking about, an order of magnitude more difficult?
It shouldn't be, but the FAA is going to make it that way.
Okay.
You know,
Why?
and I poke a little bit at the FAA, understanding they have a very hard job to do. It is their job to make sure that there's safe integration, and we are talking about a substantial, almost it's a leap of faith. It's really more of a psychological barrier to putting UAVs in the national airspace as it is to a technical barrier. We do need more regulation in terms of what it takes to have better what they call sense and avoid. Right now, the FAA will say that the reason you can't have UAVs in national airspace is because they can't see and avoid like a human can. And for those of you who've ever sat in the front of a commercial cockpit, you will know that you can't see anything from a commercial cockpit. So, in fact, the sensors that we're trying to develop, we in terms of the community, are actually going to make commercial manned aviation much safer as well, because we're essentially going to put a protective bubble around an aircraft in terms of safety and allow aircraft to talk to one another. So we're talking about big technological leaps, really more in terms of integration and the infrastructure of technology than the technology itself. But you're actually talking to a group of people in the FAA who, you know, their whole lives have been manned aviation. And this is actually, it's causing a bit of a crisis, identity crisis for people in the military. You know, you should look at the Air Force to see how much trouble it's causing me. If we start turning over aviation to robots, what does that mean for us as individuals? What does it mean for mankind if all of a sudden our cars and our planes and our trains, like they are in Europe, are highly automated? So I think it's not just aviation that's on this cusp. I think it's many, many sectors of the transportation industry, and I think it's causing a lot of people heartache because it's redefining who they are and what they're capable of doing.
Well, and on that, I mean, you were a fighter pilot.
I was.
You come from a very, you know, elite kind of culture that very much prides itself on human endeavor and initiative. I mean, do your colleagues look at you now that you're with MIT and like building these human-robot interfaces as like you're trying to put them out of a job? And is pilot an endangered species?
I am considered a traitor by many people in my community, and there's a Patrick Smith on Salon.com. He's the Ask the Pilot guy. I mean, he chases me around to, you know, basically harass me about trying to put the commercial pilot out of work. The fact of the matter is the heyday is over. The heyday of the fighter pilot is gone. Israel announced a couple of weeks ago that in 40 years, all fighters will be UAVs in Israel. That's a pretty bold claim when one country comes out and says we're going to replace everything with a UAV. But I'm here to tell you, it's really fun. It's really cool. And what makes me better than everyone in this room is that I flew a fighter and I could land a plane on an aircraft carrier by myself. But it doesn't make me better than the computer. The computer always lands the aircraft better on the carrier by itself. The computer doesn't get tired. The computer doesn't have a ramp strike at the end of the carrier at 3 a.m. The computer puts the bomb or the weapon on the target it's supposed to, and it doesn't make mistakes in terms of just trying to get the visual target. I know there's been a lot of concern in this room about weaponizing UAVs, and I definitely am in agreement that we need to revisit our policies in terms of how we're weaponizing any platform, but I am here to tell you as a fighter pilot, humans make so many more mistakes at the tip of the spear, in the cockpit, trying to drop bombs. conducting warfare from UAVs, where you actually have a group of people along with a lawyer sitting next to you, or at least on the radio with you, trying to make these hard decisions, is a much better form of warfare than the kind I fought in. And so even though we hear, we're scared of UAVs in terms of weaponizing them, I will tell you that in doing so, we've actually saved a lot of lives.